Another common way to style elements is using a class. And you can think of a class as something that many HTML attributes can have, and you kind of wire them all up together in terms of the CSS and style them all at once. So let's do an example of that. And what I'll do is I'll get rid of this yellow color on our example div up here. I'll refresh. And let's say I wanted these inner divs to both be styled in the same way. Right? They may have different content inside, but we want kind of overall styling to work pretty much the same. And we can use a class attribute inside of our HTML tag. So that's similar to, as we saw, let's see, down here somewhere, we can have an ID. An ID should be unique, but class is something that many elements can share. So we'll call this one example. Call it example div, in fact, example-div. And notice I'm doing kind of the CSS style, so word-word. Right, so this div has this class on it. We can do the same with this div, example div. And you know what, for the fun of it, let's do one more here just so that we can have 3. And we'll paste that in like so. This one will say I'm the third div. Okay, so now we can style these classes easily. And we can combine some methods we've seen already, or if you just want to explicitly grab the class, it looks like this in CSS. And classes in CSS always start with a dot. So that's how you know you're accessing a class. And then you just give it the class name, and you style it as you would any other HTML element. So how can we style a div? Well, we can do things like set a margin. Let's do margin top 10 pixels. And we'll do margin bottom 10 pixels. Right, so let's just see if we were successful here in setting a margin. Okay, I'll refresh again just to be sure, and let's inspect here. So right click, inspect, let's see what's going on. So we'll grab, by the way, you can use this little element inspector, and then you can click on something to inspect it. It'll highlight it for you. Right, so let's see, looks like we have margin on the top and bottom of this div. Actually, we're on the H4 right now, so we'll go to the div itself. Okay, looks like it didn't apply the stylings we asked it to apply, so let's refresh again. And let's see. Aha, because I said example class when I should have been calling it example div. My mistake. Let's try that again. We'll refresh again. Alright, so we're on the div here, and now if I hover over down here on the box model representation, we see that we have a 10 pixel margin on the top and also a 10 pixel margin on the bottom. Right, and that would be true of any of these divs. Right, so again, I'll inspect maybe this one down here. Make sure I'm on the actual div element. Boom, and we can see that we have set margins on all of these divs. If we want something that we can really see right off the bat, we can always do something like change the background color as well, as usual. Background color, let's try lime green. Refresh. Yep, so there we see that we are applying these stylings to 3 different divs because they all have the same class. Now, this class is not limited to only being inside this section. We can add this class anywhere. For example, this div could have a class of example div, and our styling would apply to the elements inside this class at that point as well. Right, so class equals example div, and we can refresh, and we can see that now the styling is being applied there as well. And they don't have to be the same type of HTML element either. Usually they are, because usually it makes logical sense to do so. But if you wanted to do something wild, like put a class on this section that is the same as the class up here, you could do that. Class equals example div. Right, let's see what our image looks like at this point. Right, so our class is being applied here now. And this definitely could have a downside in that you need to be aware of your class names and keep them unique. Now, that's a bit higher level, and there's all sorts of different strategies for naming your classes, but just starting out, I would just recommend trying to name them something descriptive, right? So you might call it, green green background, for example. That's pretty descriptive, and you're unlikely to use that elsewhere if that's not your intent, right? And then we'll name these ones green background as well. Green background and green background. You could also be specific as well if you only need to style in a certain way. And what I mean by that is you can kind of combine these, I keep calling them kind of general selectors because they just kind of generically grab these generic HTML elements. But you can combine these. So if you only want to grab the class of green example, that is a direct child of section, for example. Right? We're kind of combining these two different ways we've seen, plus this little direct descendant selector. Right, so if we refresh here, let's see what happens. Well, nothing. And again, I should have called it green background, not green example. All right, let's try that again. There we go. It's applied here, but not anywhere else. Even if we put, on this div, for example, class equals green background. Let's see if it's applied here to our links. Refresh up here, and no, it's not, because we are only grabbing the class that is directly descended from a section element. This can get as complex as you need it as well. So, just to kind of add another example on, if we have another class on our H4s, class equals cursive H4, for example. Right, so I want to put it here, and I want to put it on, for some reason, this one, class equals cursive H4, and then this one, I want to put it here, class equals cursive H4. Well, we can kind of combine these methods as well, right? So we could say, okay, give me all the green background classes, and anywhere where it has a descendant named cursive H4, notice I have a dot in front of it, we can style that a different way. And I called it cursive, so we'll set the font family property to cursive. Right, this is just going to kind of use your browser's built-in cursive font. And let's refresh. And we can see that we have selected it correctly. Right, so we would only apply this if it is a child of green background. Right, which means if for some reason, maybe by accident, we put a class on this H1 of cursive H4, it won't get applied because it's not a child of a green background element. And so we refresh, this H1 is unaffected, and I will undo that. So I'd say it's pretty common to see classes when you are writing CSS, maybe a bit more so than just kind of your general selectors. Again, because you might have a whole bunch of HTML with a lot of main elements, or you probably only have one, but a lot of section or a lot of article or image elements. So classes are just an easy way to kind of split those off and put some distinct styling on several pieces at once. And you don't need to do several pieces at once. If you have class on just one element, hey, that's totally fine. But it's just kind of a different way of applying styles to multiple things. That is often combined with, you often see something like div green background like this, for example.